It's very, very important to understand why you're afraid of sharing the stories. Then it's this sense of being supported that, you can actually be vulnerable. But it's also about understanding the fact that sharing your story doesn't mean that you're going to share all your darkest, deepest secrets. There is this beautiful metaphor about this, which says that you cannot share from a bleeding wound. So if a story is still bleeding, you cannot really share it because it will still hurt you. Not only that, also the fact that if you share while you're bleeding, you haven't seen the lesson yet. So the story is not helpful for your audience.
Welcome to another episode of Sacred Stories of the Spirit. My name is Jordan Harcourt-Hughes and I'm your host. In this episode, I'm joined by Beatrice N. Kabutakapua. She's a storyteller, coach and former journalist, and she works to help women of colour entrepreneurs find and use their authentic voice with confidence. Beatrice shares her journey from growing up as one of the only black girls in a small Italian town to becoming a global voice for authentic storytelling. And along the way, she discovered that visibility isn't necessarily about being loud, it's about being ready. And I think that's a great insight for us all to explore. In this episode, we talk about the fear that can freeze our stories and the importance of having safety and support when we are getting ready to share and to tell our story, and actually how to recognise when a story has healed enough to be told. We talk about the fact that not every story is ready to be shared, and that's okay because readiness is part of the sacred timing of transformation. So let's dive in. Beatrice, hello, welcome, and thank you for joining me. It's lovely to have you here for a chat today.
Thank you so much, Jordan. It's really great to be here.
Now, if we could start with origin stories, could you tell me about your early experiences with visibility? What started your journey looking at what that means to be visible or not visible?
Yeah. I never really reflected on visibility per se before I started my journey in my career. So
Yeah.
obviously when you are a kid, unless somebody is telling you that
Yeah.
you're being too much or something, you don't really notice. They're so lovely to see how free
Yeah.
they are. And I was pretty much a very, not too much, but like a loud, very sociable kid. And I know that at some point that started to change, but I remember the first time that I was very visible and I realized that it gave me a little bit of anxiety because I was maybe around 7, 8 years old, and I used to write poems when I was little. I used to write a lot, and among other things, I
Yeah.
wrote poems.
Yeah,
And
lovely.
I remember I wrote this very silly poem on summer and actually no
Yeah.
spring and how people get hay fever and how you start sneezing and it made my parents laugh so hard that my
Oh,
mom said, "Oh, can you share this poem with a group of my female friends?" My mom has always been in different no-profit organizations supporting women's right. And I said, yeah, 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 of course, imagining, my women's friend, like 3, 5 friends. And then the day came when we had to meet all of these friends, and I had to tell my poem. And I remember, still remember it. I remember I sneaked at the audience, and my perception of what I remember is like this sea of women. It wasn't 3,
yeah.
5 women. There were so many.
Yeah, wow.
And I started crying and I told my mom, I don't want to do it anymore. No, 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 no. And she didn't really uh, help. She was like, oh, well, you're here now.
Yeah.
And I did it. I went on the stage. I was very scared and I read the poem. And then I just noticed how people were reacting, how they were laughing and how they were enjoying, and they weren't focusing on me being scared. And this is a
Yeah.
reflection that I made after, right?
Yeah.
So I always keep this memory very vivid. It's always very vivid in my mind, because I think that's when I started to think about the fact, oh, you put yourself out there and it can be scary. I think that's one of the first moment I can remember.
Yeah. Fantastic. So that would have informed your journey into being a storytelling coach. Tell me about that. What does it take to start that journey to separate out of the crowd and be prepared to be visible?
Yeah, there are different aspects. The very first step is willingness. You need to want to be visible, even a little bit. And then from that step, there is also the understanding that being seen doesn't mean that you're going to become Beyonce seen
Yeah.
all of a sudden. It's not that level,
Yeah.
it's not that
Yeah.
scary. And that's okay, because it shouldn't be. It's really, I always invite my clients to go step by step, but with the
Nice.
understanding that, first of all, it's not about them, especially because I work with women of color entrepreneurs. And the majority of time, the businesses that they create, they are business that they create to help other people in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah.
And when you do that, the fact that you're being visible, it's not about you. It's about reaching the right people that need your services, that need
Yes.
to have the solution that you only have. And when you shift the view, when you focus on them rather than yourself, it becomes a little bit easier. But then
Yeah.
it's really practice. I remember that at the very beginning, I tend to use on myself a little bit of shock therapy. So if something
Yeah.
scares me, I go all in. So at
Fantastic.
the very beginning, I wouldn't share my photos on social media. I wouldn't share video. I wouldn't do videos. And then I gave myself the challenge to go live on Facebook and Instagram every single week, the same day. Whether I was traveling somewhere, whether I was at home, whether it didn't matter, whether I had makeup on or
Yeah.
not, it didn't really
Yeah.
matter. And the more it was so uncomfortable.
Yes. Fantastic.
And you can tell from the videos as well, because they were really, um, I was really rigid and really
Yeah.
like I was presenting a show or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But the more I did that, the more I relaxed, the more I found what worked for me, which I think
Yes.
it's another key. We are sold on this idea that in order to reach any kind of goal, whether it's visibility, whether it's marketing, whether it's the way you shape your business or activity or anything, you have to follow the path that someone else has followed in the same way,
Yes.
which doesn't necessarily work. You can learn from what other people have done, from their mistakes, especially, and then you
Yeah.
have to adapt on, based on who you are, on what works for you, on when it works for you, or, so it's a balance between taking things slow, self-awareness, and focus on the audience, on the people that you're
Yeah.
going to help rather than yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that story. I love the idea of shock therapy, like just, going full in. That's fantastic. But what I also like about it is that, I think there is this journey that I think we have to take in terms of showing up imperfectly. And that sounds like kind of what you did. You showed up, you went live, whether you had makeup on, whether you were prepared, whether you weren't. And even just the practice, I think, is really healthy. Did you find that people were less judgmental of you than you were of yourself?
People didn't care.
No.
Not once I received a message about how I appeared.
Yeah.
Never. It never happened. It was really about, oh, this is such an interesting reflection. I never
Yeah.
thought about this.
Yeah.
I'm going to, join you live next time.
Yeah.
I never had, like, maybe now that I work with my team member and they see what I post maybe now or what I share now or the quality of what I do now. They look back and they're like, what is this? And people didn't care.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the learning journey. And I also like your reflection that the way that other people do it isn't necessarily the way that
Yeah.
it will work for us. So adapting, trying, and testing. What are some of the things that you see most frequently when you're working with your storytelling clients?
Hmm. So a lot of the time, people, especially women, listening to people they shouldn't listen to. And, everyone has their own opinion. However, I remember, for instance, having a conversation with this um, entrepreneur. She's a Black entrepreneur, and she had a mentoring session with a white entrepreneur, more
Yes,
senior, more experienced.
yes,
And she was thinking about sharing more of her story within her marketing material and branding. And I will never forget, she told me that he said, "You're not that famous, people don't care.
oh,
This is not the right time to share your story because, at this point, people don't care." I can't even say that I can understand where he was coming from. But I think that there is something, and I've learned this for myself as well. You have to listen to the suggestions of people who can relate to your lived experience in some way.
yeah,
And they might not happen all of the time and in every aspect, but for instance, saying to someone who comes from a background of briefly being told that their stories doesn't matter, telling
uh,
them, "Oh, no, 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 people don't care about your story," without even listening to the story, by the way,
yeah,
it's a very, very strong
yeah,
statement to make.
absolutely, yeah,
Plus, then she told me her story, and that's the second thing that oftentimes happens. She told me her story, and she's a creative entrepreneur, and she started being creative when she was stuck in the hospital because she had several accidents and problems with her brain. And I was like, what? And she just assumed that that wasn't relevant, not interesting in terms of this is an interesting story, but just relevant. And lots of entrepreneurs I talk to, they don't see how their stories are relevant because they don't see the
yes,
lessons in their stories.
yes,
And if you cannot see the
yes,
lesson in your story, you just assume that, I'm this way, or I had this idea, or I observed that this wasn't working, so I fix it. And it's always going back to the same question. Yeah, but why you?
yes, I love that. Look for the
And also,
lesson.
what did you learn in the process?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I wonder if it's also because we're so close to our own story that sometimes we
Mm,
just don't have the distance to be able to say, wow, that's amazing.
yeah, yeah. Which is why it's always so powerful to work with someone else,
Yeah,
someone who can look at your story from outside and ask you the questions that will make you reflect a little bit more, understand more around your story. Because people think that they know their stories, which is one of the things that I always share, whether I do workshops or webinars or when I do coaching, is that the first step in your storytelling journey is to find those stories. And a lot of the time people say, but, I think I know what my story is.
yes,
And we know the event. You know the events that happen. You know the series of situations, but you don't know the story. That they oftentimes don't know the stories or story that brought them to their business, and they don't go back in the past enough to understand, for instance, growing up, what was one thing that they were doing that now they're doing in their business, or one thing that they saw, that they experienced, that now they're trying to solve with their business.
yeah.
So
Connecting
we
the
we
dots.
think we know our stories, but we
Yeah.
don't.
Well, I hope you're enjoying the second series of Sacred Stories of the Spirit. This season, conversations traverse change, identity, and belonging, and they ask us how to live with more integrity, more courage, and more connection, both to ourselves and each other. Together, we're looking at what it means to live story as practice, to let story guide our healing, our growth, and our understanding of what's possible in the day-to-day. Stay with us as we journey through the landscapes of courage, authenticity, and transformation. And are you able to share some of the success stories that you've had with people where you've seen them really transform through being able to really kind of, I guess, dive in and deeply understand and share the lessons from those stories that they have?
Oh my God, yeah, yeah, yeah. I have one of the first clients. She was probably the first or the second client I worked with. I remember I had these small packages of coaching sessions that I used to do. And at that point, I had my own framework, but I only just used it on myself and
Yeah,
on maybe other two people, and I had done one workshop. So I worked with her based on the knowledge that I had. And I remember then we had this Instagram live where she shared, "Oh, you really helped me to unfreeze my stories."
yeah,
And
lovely.
it was something that I really loved. But
Yep,
even more, I loved the fact that when we talked again, we are still in touch. And when we talked again, she was telling me how she went from she had her own business, but, keeping it a little bit quiet, not
yeah,
sharing enough stories, not sharing lots of stories of her childhood as well with anyone, not even with her family. From there to now being featured in a documentary on Netflix.
yeah, fantastic.
And I remember talking to her about this, and I was like, "Do you remember like when you
Way back when.
started?" And
Yes,
now this another one who also dreaded to be visible in any way. She's now a spokesperson for one of her communities, speaking at conferences, which
fantastic.
is unheard of for her,
Yeah,
for her
yeah,
experience. So, yeah, there are so
yeah,
many that I
great.
could mention.
Thank you. I'm interested in some of the language that your client used when you were using that first example, which she said, "Thank you for unfreezing my
Yeah.
stories." And I think that idea of frozen is really interesting because for me, it's got a lot of connotations around fear and the fear that we can feel very frozen. Does that resonate with you? And do you have any recommendations for people that are wanting to get past that frozen, paralyzed state of not being able to act or move forward or, find a way of releasing those stories out into the world?
Yeah. It's very, very important to understand why you're afraid of sharing the stories. And it's very important to be supported by someone or a group of someone. I found that the most successful environment for my clients to work on is within groups.
Yeah,
So then it's this sense of being supported that you can actually be vulnerable, and that's a very important thing to feel when you are starting to share your story. You want to feel safe, but it's also about understanding the fact that sharing your story doesn't mean that you're going to share all your darkest deepest secrets.
yeah,
It's not the history of the person, and it's
yeah,
not everything about the
yes,
person. There is this beautiful metaphor about this, which says that you cannot share from a bleeding wound. So if a story is still bleeding, you cannot really share it because it will still hurt you.
yes. That's very
And
wise.
yeah, and not only that, also the fact that if you share while you're bleeding, you haven't seen the lesson yet. So the story is not
Yes.
helpful for your audience.
Yeah,
You're just
fantastic.
sharing from the place of, oh my gosh, this is so painful, and this is
Yes, the trauma.
horrible, and this is the experience. And then the audience is watching or following or listening to the story for the morbid human
Yeah.
curiosity of
Yeah.
something, painful happening, but they're
Yeah.
not getting anything
Yeah.
from it. So I
Fantastic.
always tell my clients, you have to find the lesson,
Yeah.
because otherwise the story is gonna hurt you and it's going to hurt
Yes.
your audience.
Yeah. Well, Beatrice, thank you so much for those words of wisdom. What are you working on at the moment, and where can people find you?
So at the moment, I am working on a series of online courses for my clients. One is it's something that we have already released, and it's an audio guide, a self-coaching guide in a way, called Who I Am. And it's basically a guide for them to start making those steps into understanding what their stories are.
Yes, love it.
And in terms of where people can find me, I hang out quite a bit on Instagram
Nice.
at Bea_storytelling coach. I'm pretty sure if they just write Beatrice storytelling, I will come up. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's where I hang
Yeah.
out most of the time.
Great. And I will include those links as well. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you again for the conversation. Lots of wisdom there. Great to have you. Thanks, Beatrice.
Thank you, Jordan.
Well, that's another episode done and dusted for today. I really want to thank Beatrice for reminding us that storytelling begins with readiness. We can't share from a bleeding wound. When we rush to speak before we've healed, that story can hurt us, and as well, it's not necessarily valuable to those who listen yet. But when we wait, when we've found the lesson within the experience, that is when the story becomes medicine. Beatrice's wisdom invites us to honour our own pace, and I think that's a really valuable takeaway from this episode for all of us. You can learn more about her work at beatricekabutakapua.com, and you'll find the links in the show notes as well. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Until next time, I hope you also have the chance to trust in the timing of your own story. Take care. If you're new to Sacred Stories of the Spirit, you might like to go back and listen to Series 1 of the podcast, where the journey began. In this first series, we explore the transformative power of story and how the act of sharing, reflecting, and reframing our experiences can help us make sense of who we are. So if you haven't already, I invite you to take a listen, and hopefully you'll find something in each episode that's timeless, whether it's an insight, a question, or just a moment of recognition and reflection. Enjoy.